Recruits, welcome back to Bootcamp with the General. In the last lesson, we talked about responsibility and how responsibility is the ability to take credit for the positive and the negative things that you do. Not just one, but both of them. Our next character trait, which builds on that, is self-respect. And self-respect is the ability to learn from yourself in any given situation. All right, General Schneider, in the last lesson we talked about responsibility, and you gave us some examples from your childhood of how your parents taught you responsibility and how it was probably easier for you to learn responsibility because the consequences were almost immediate.
That's right.
Now, in this lesson, we're talking about self-respect, and which is the idea that you can learn from yourself in any given situation. So, which takes a lot of self-awareness.
Right.
So, could you give some examples in your book Little House in which you learn from yourself the good things you did, maybe the negative things that you did?
Well, I think one of the things was in your schoolwork. Mother expected, my parents never bugged us about our grades, but they just expected you to do really well. And it developed a sense of achievement. You wanted to, you didn't want to disappoint your parents because you knew they expected you to do well, and they were having to sacrifice for us to go to school because we couldn't work on the farm. And I can remember days when Daddy would like to have had us stay and work on the farm, and but both parents agreed we needed to go to school. They were really big on school. So I think by really doing a good job at whatever you do, particularly as a child, learn how to really take seriously your schoolwork, try to make good grades and do well in school, and that helps build self-respect. Because if you goof off and you just don't do things the way they should be done, then you start feeling bad about yourself. And I think the sort of the secret of success is to have a lot of small achievements along the way. Good grades. If you have, like we were on a farm, I had a pig that I entered in the county fair, and he got the blue ribbon. So I was that really boosted my self-respect, and just a lot of little achievements, just trying to do everything you can to the very best way along, and that helps your self-confidence. And so I guess the big thing is just try to achieve whatever you're doing, whether it's schoolwork or working on the farm or working in a store, whatever you do. Just try to always leave it better than you found it. That's a good thing. And
always leave it better than you found it.
That's right, yeah. And all the way up the line. I've been into a lot of organizations where they were not running well, and when I left, they're running real well. So it starts off in childhood. You just try to do everything the best way that you possibly can, and you learn as you go along. You may not do it the best the first time, but then if you have to do it over, then try to do it better.
So you mentioned your parents and about how they sacrificed for you, and how getting good grades or doing well in school was just one way that you could show your appreciation back.
Right.
Now, what was the relationship of your parents like to each other that you kids saw that might have contributed to having a strong sense of self-respect?
Well, I never recall my parents arguing or disagreeing in front of us. They may have done that while we were in school or somewhere else, but not very much, because Mother really ran the household. She was the kingpin at home, and Daddy made the big decisions on the farm and animals and so forth. I'm sure they coordinated on that sort of behind when we weren't around necessarily what they were going to do, but I never felt that they were pulling. You didn't have to show loyalty to one or the other. You knew that whatever they said, they were going to agree, and if you got punishment, you knew the other one was going to back the other one up. So that's another thing later on in life is try to have good relationships with your family. That really makes a difference. And you look back with a lot of pride and respect for your parents, and you don't argue with them. They're the boss when you're a kid, and you you shouldn't forget that. And then that just builds a lot of confidence if you know that they are agreeing on what they're doing and what they're telling you. So you just don't have that personal conflict as a child.
Right. Now your siblings, there were 6 of you.
Right.
And you guys are just a couple of years apart, it seems.
About 18 months apart.
18 months apart.
Yeah.
So, and you lived in 800 square feet.
Yeah.
And you had a father who, his best year in farming, he made about $250.
Yeah.
So you have a lot of what kind of modern and kind of millennial, families would describe as some hardships. So how did your parents, bearing all that stress, dealing with all that, how did your parents relate to each of you in such a way that each of your siblings kind of got equal, attention, or had the ability to develop, self-respect themselves?
Well, I look back on it. I don't know how they did that because you always felt like you were the number one child, really. They had a great sense of never putting you down and never trying to play off one or the other, or never saying, well, Grace did better in school than you did. Parents were really good about giving pretty well equal opportunities for things. I was the oldest boy, and I had my dad's name, so I sort of lived up. I didn't want to embarrass him because I was had his name. My second brother was named, his middle name was after my mother's father, Clyde Curlin. Mm-hmm. And so he was sort of favored by them, but we didn't resent it. We understood that because of the name and so forth. I don't know exactly how we got there, but they would take him on trips or whatever. Okay. But Mother would make sure that things equaled out somehow. I would get to go out and work on my aunt's farm, who was a Snyder family, and my older sister would get to go do certain things that we didn't get to do because she was a little bit older. But for some reason, we never really resented it because somehow they would balance it out. If Clyde got to go do something, then I would sort of get to do something with the other side. And it was just a real balancing act. I think anybody that has 6 children, you've got to, that's a pretty delicate balance not to favor one and let them have something and the others resent it. So it was just an amazing way that they did it, just using good old common sense. They didn't have any manuals or books. I think one thing, my mother really respected her dad, Granddad Curlin, and therefore we didn't want to do anything to embarrass my parents or my granddad. Sure. And that was, if Mother ever sort of pinged on things, she said, don't embarrass your family. So if you were in some kind of a situation later on and you were tempted to do something, well, they may find out about it and it would be an embarrassment to the family. So it's helped mentally sort of keep you in the right track.
Right, that makes sense. Well, you bring up a very important point about your name and how, we don't really think about our name as kind of being almost like it's a goal for us, I'm named after my father as well, who was named after his father. Right. But there's an identity there that I guess that is just uniquely yours. Yeah. And you can develop that, with all the resources, the initiative, with all of the skill sets that you have in order to make it that much, that much more, I guess. So when it comes to self-respect, there are certain junctures in a young man's life when he has to, as we say nowadays, level up. So what were some of those leveling up opportunities where you went almost overnight from, being at one level of skill or understanding, and then you had to learn really fast overnight?
Well, just like as a kid, you learn. When we got our tractor the first time, I took a great pride in being able to plow a roll the way it should be done. And I got to be real skilled at driving a tractor. And then my brother and I found an old motorcycle in a neighbor's barn, and we tore it down and built it back up and rode that. And so we really, pride in being able to do that was really built our self-confidence. And then we were good with animals. We always did a good job with taking care of our horses and milking and all the other things, just trying to really do a good job at whatever you did. And the more of those little successes, I think, are what gradually develop your self-confidence and your ability then later in life to move on up to higher levels.
You know, that's good. So scaling yourself,
right?
Scaling your improvement or your successes. Now, you've told me some really interesting stories out of this book, Jet Pioneer. Actually, in addition to the book, Jet Pioneer, about your advancement in the military, which there were some strange opportunities you had to make rank and to do things that could not be done nowadays in the United States military. Could you give us an idea, give us maybe a story or two of how you made rank just on the spot for being willing to take on a task that maybe you were not trained to do, but you felt well equipped to be able to figure it out?
Well, I just always look for opportunities to. When I was a buck private, I had an old corporal that was from Brooklyn. He's sort of an uneducated old guy that sort of held over from World War II. He couldn't get a job in the civilian world, I guess. And we had a few of those after World War II. Mm-hmm. And he said, "Don't you guys never volunteer for nothing." And I just disliked him because he was a sort of crude kind of guy. So I said, I'm just going to volunteer for everything. So my whole career, I would volunteer to do anything that needed to be done. And the one example was that I was down in Texas, and this general used to come in the morning in his airplane. At that time, all generals had old World War II airplanes that sort of fixed up, and they could use for their business to go around to their areas. And he came in early one morning, and I went down to meet him, and he looked at my name tag, and I had met him 2 or 3 other times before when he came in, because I was always working at oddball hours, and he'd come in at oddball hours, and nobody else would be around, so I'd go down and welcome him there. And so he looked at my name tag and he said, "Snyder, looks like you're the only guy that works around here. Why aren't you a major?" And I said, "Wouldn't hurt my feelings, General." He said, "You'll be on the next list." He was able to, I made it 4 years ahead of my classmates. Wow. So that was being at the right place at the right time, and the fact that I volunteered to go down and was working when other people were doing other things. And another one is I ended up as a squadron adjutant, which is an administrative job. Plus, I was flying as much as everybody else, and was in combat. And I got looking at a regulation one day that came down from our headquarters, and it said, if you're filling a certain position in combat, that it authorizes you to move up another rank. It'd be temporary rank while you're in combat. So being a squadron adjutant, in addition to being the combat pilot, I was authorized to be a captain. So I told him, I wrote it up to my boss, and I said, "Boss," I said, it says I could be moved up to captain while I'm here in combat." And he said, "Well, okay, give it to me, I'll sign it." He said, so a few days later, here I was a captain, all my buddies were young lieutenants. So unbelievable. But just taking advantage of good opportunities when they come along, and I was always tried to do that. Of course, I was always working harder than anybody else, because I was flying every mission that anybody else flew. Plus, at night, I was down at the order room doing all the administration and paperwork and all the other stuff. So everybody else was over at the bar at the club. So right. So that fascinates me. You say, take obviously every opportunity to advance, but also scale it so that you have quite a few successes, right. Or as we say, you have quite a few wins on your board. Right. Because you learn, I guess, if you are constantly having success versus, having very rare success. Because nowadays, I think a lot of young men have a lot of doubt. Yeah. They've got a lot of anxiety about who they are, what their abilities are, and they tend to
see themselves in competition with everyone else out there. Yeah. And that really does suppress a lot of kind of experimenting with your abilities. Mm-hmm. So it seems to me that you lived in the world, back then, where the only way was forward, at least being in the family that you were, being, having the upbringing that you had, the only way was forward. And so you kids just naturally, pushed yourself.
Well, you can do that in any phase of life. It's a matter of mental attitude also. And I did a lot of reading. I started reading books, positive motivational type books at an early age, like Norman Vincent Peale's The Power of Positive Thinking and How to Think and Grow Rich. And that's not necessarily from a money standpoint, but it's being rich in experiences and events and accomplishments and so forth. And so you need to start reading that. And another thing is having a goal early in life. If, like my grandson, at age 5, he wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to be fighters. And so I used to go into where they lived, and I'd put my helmet on him. And when he was in pilot training, he sent me a picture, showed that 5-year-old with my helmet on it, and then it showed him sitting in the cockpit with his helmet on in the cockpit. So I think it's really important to just like the Olympic athletes. If you're a certain, you achieve certain goal, or you want to achieve certain goals as an athlete, then you focus on that. It keeps you out of a lot of trouble from other things. My brother and I got into Civil Air Patrol because we wanted to be pilots after we decided we were going to do that. So then we started reading books about aviation and everything just focused on how to be a pilot. So that's really important for young people, I think, to really read and talk to people and think about how you can use your attributes and your interest, and then start focusing on that. So that keeps you out of a lot of temptations that'll draw you off to other things that get you in trouble.
It reminds me of a verse, love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
And I heard someone recently say that if we actually loved our neighbors the way that we love ourselves, it would be a really, really bad world. So really being able to see that the value we see in others really does come from the value we see in ourselves.
Sure.
And if we're not advancing, we can lose sight of that we have value ourselves. That seems to be kind of what that world was like back then, a world that taught you to look for value. And it still seems also that it was an extension of the pioneer world, where pioneers, they just kept pushing westward,
Well, you can still do that though in our current environment if you look for it. And you're always looking for how you can help other people. To me, that's like now I focus on helping veterans. That's my goal. And I always look for how I can help somebody. I get calls all the time from people. Young folks want me to write a letter of recommendation for them to go to the Air Force Academy or whatever. So I write a lot of letters to help young people go along. And I got a call the other day from a guy that I helped when he was a student. And I even forgot what all I did, but he called me the other day and he said, I've been looking for you for 30 years now. I said, I've been trying to find you, and I wanted to thank you for what you did. And so you can do a lot of these little things along the way. You may never know about them like that. I had no clue that he remembered that, but just constantly thinking of how you can help other people, and that helps your self-confidence, and it gets you out of your selfish things instead of just thinking about yourself.
I understand. I think a great anchor or item of interest you have here are your ribbons. And these are your Air Force ribbons, right?
Yeah, I got a few of those.
That's right, a few of those. And each of these ribbons represents a kind of like a feat or an accomplishment.
Right.
And how long were you in the military?
32 years.
In the Air Force. Yeah. Okay, great. Wow. So, and I think the fact that these ribbons are little, but they really kind of make up this bar right here.
Sure.
So little accomplishments actually kind of result in.
Well, it sort of starts off. Just a good example here would be, I'd say, just an achievement record of doing a certain things, and then gradually going up, like the Distinguished Flying Cross and Legion of Merit, and the Air Medal, and then the Meritorious Service Medal. Starts off with low accomplishment called the Commendation Medal.
Okay.
That's sort of at the lower level. And then you get a Meritorious Service Medal, and then you get ones for combat if you were in combat. And then sort of at the end of the line, that's probably the highest you can get non-combat record.
Wow, so the most distinguished accomplishments are really based upon the
smaller achievements along the line. And you always just want to keep looking for how you can do things and accomplish different goals, and then help other people accomplish their goals.
Right.
Well, I think one thing is to start trying to do everything that you do to the best of your ability. And if you're going to school, try really work hard and make good grades and learn something and learn to think. That's another thing that you need to develop is, we spend a lot of time learning facts, but we don't teach creativity and ingenuity and initiative. So the more you can develop that, think of new ideas of how to do things, and set some goals as you go along. Smaller goals as you get older and more complicated, then set larger goals. And as early in life as you can, try to think about what you really like to do. If you like music, start playing the guitar. And I played the harmonica, and got pretty good at it. And a good example, a buddy of mine was a neighbor, and he's always sitting around picking his guitar. And he went in the Air Force, and then he started a little combo and ended up having his national television program. His name was Jimmy Dean. I don't know whether you ever heard of him, but he had a big program for years, and he was raised in the same kind of environment we were. He was mother was a single mother, and they didn't have any money either. But he had a goal of being a famous entertainer, and he became one. If you look at his the record, Jimmy Dean, and he wrote Big Bad John and a lot of other songs, and had a really great program. But I think that's one of the things is really try to excel in everything you do. Just don't try to slack off and just get by, but really try to achieve what you set out to do. And then if you, as early as you can, decide what you want to do in life. Look at other professions. One thing that you might do is start looking at what kind of profession, what is the aura around a certain profession. Are you going to work inside? You're going to you like detail work? You want outside work? You like a lot of action? Or you like maybe like a CPA where you're sitting at a desk and so forth? And the sooner you can do that and start concentrating on developing your skills and your contacts and so forth in that area, the better off you're going to be. So just try to start setting small goals and then achieve them, and then look for a bigger goal and so forth. Yeah, if you can, pick a profession or a way of life that you like. And if it's photography, or if it's entertainment, or if it's flying airplanes, or being a good CPA or a lawyer or doctor, then start thinking about those kind of skills that you're going to need to achieve those particular goals.